Begin, Emanuel.
Hello, everybody. Emanuel Pastreich at Center for Truth Politics, Green Liberty. And I'm happy to invite four of our important thinkers, Mark Rollason, Shane Almgren, Amanda's last name, and Chuck Fall. And we're going to talk a little bit today about uh, how the United States is actually run. This is a critical question since decisions are being made in a very opaque manner and is shifting. And I guess, I start the ball rolling by saying we had this remarkable meeting between Donald Trump and the new mayor of New York, Mandani, which I think almost seemed like it was set up to confuse everyone as to how things are run. And let's start with that and get into some of the details of how in November 2025 the United States is actually run.
Mhm. Who's going to take the lead on that, Emmanuel? You want to give us your perspective. How is the?
Oh,
Why don't you get us going, and then we'll all give our
right.
perspective. Give us
Well,
take the lead.
I appreciate that. And I don't pretend to understand how the United States is run, but I will say this. We're often looking at an interference pattern between different interest groups who are tugging in different ways. There are personalities. I mean, Donald Trump, for example, his personal interests, his obsessions, his family interests, his investments, his ties to personal leaders does influence policy. But at the same time, Donald Trump is essentially a puppet like figure who's manipulated by players behind the scenes. So I would tend to say real politics in America has to do with the control of information, the control of food, the control of transportation, the control of the internet in its various forms, and the real politics taking place with multinational investment banks, private equity, and their intersection with multinational corporations, who then run a series of PR firms, consulting firms, lobbyist firms, who are increasingly reducing politicians, government officials, and for that matter, now professors, educators, journalists to uh, puppets. So that's the real politics is never discussed in much of the analysis, and I have been particularly disturbed by the sort of John Mearsheimer, Jeffrey Sachs discussion in which they want to say, well, the United States bureaucrats are stupid or foolish. United States is short-sighted. It's making all these mistakes. Trump's making all these mistakes, which is, I think, not accurate. That Trump is doing exactly what they want him to do, and probably he's going to take the fall for all this, which is exactly what he was supposed to do.
Wow.
So, other people's
Okay,
perspectives.
well then who's going to go next?
Oh,
Shane,
oh,
you want to dive right in or go to Mark
well,
Wallace?
I've got today's meeting with Trump, I'd say has to go down as one of the most bizarre days in an administration that is marked by, we count the number of bizarre episodes on two hands, at least.
Right.
With Trump, the things he said on the campaign trail, calling him a jihadist, calling him a communist. He knows he's not a communist. When he won, he backed both of his rivals. When he won, he threatened to withhold funds
Mhm.
to New York, which obviously he doesn't legally have any authority to do. But then we've seen the way that he treats people, whether it's Zelensky that's come in, if it's reporters who have said things about him, we see his reaction when he is pushed against or challenged in ways that he doesn't like. And I have never seen Donald Trump fawn all over anyone the way he was fawning over. I mean, he was just fanboying out to Mamdani today.
It was
And
amazing.
it was, and the reporters were obviously trying to stir something up. They'd asked him, Mr. Mondani, is it true that you
Call him
called
a
Trump a
fascist.
fascist? Do you stand by that? And Trump was like, oh, go ahead. You go ahead. It's okay. You can say that. And they asked him
I've been
about
called
being
worse
called a
things.
despot. And Trump's like, oh, I've been called way worse. And it's like, this is the same person that 2 days ago we told a reporter, quiet piggy, because she was pressing him on the Epstein files. And I'm like, I don't know, Emmanuel, to your point, what kind of backdoor association they might have. And I was thinking about it. And I know one thing that Trump has that most of our politicians don't is a very keen sense of the showmanship and the spectacle. And he's got history in WWE with Vince McMahon. I
Right.
mean, he participated in professional wrestling. He knows, the guys they go out there and they talk about, I'm gonna beat you down. It's gonna be the end. And then they all go out to lunch with each other's families and stuff because the whole
Right.
thing is a show. And so you wonder how much of this posturing that we saw on social media and just in the media in general, is it all just WWE, to sell papers and sell pay-per-views or whatever? Because something about this meeting just didn't go. If I had bet, I would have bet all my money and I would have gone broke today betting that this is how that meeting went down.
Wow. Emmanuel, you need to respond to that.
I have to respond. No,
Yeah,
I'm
you're
going to see you in Vegas. I'm going to pin you to the uh, my response. Well, I think the decay of the angel. The United States is going into a rapid institutional decay, and one of the uh, results of that is increasingly relying on performative activities, and we see this, in diplomacy, in security, in the military. I mean, and in technology. I mean, the United States is rapidly falling behind in basic science, in technology. We have this whole AI caper, which I think is parallel to this, in which we're, NVIDIA, Microsoft, and OpenAI have conspired to take out $100 billion or more and sort of shift it around amongst each other to buy their own stock and make money. So it's a sort of a massive collapse. But the Mondani was really, I mean, I know people who worked with him in New York, put it that way, and their assessment of him is extremely negative. That he was extremely sophisticated player, and trying to get attention for himself. He found a niche in this anti-Trump environment, and he grabbed it and played it to the hilt. But he's clearly a professional politician. I mean, just as Shane was suggesting, when the show's over, they go home and have a beer, just like Bernie Sanders. I mean, no offense, but Bernie Sanders very much like that. I mean, I know people who worked with him, but there's a show you put on. You don't call out any of the serious things, and the serious issues is not, how would you say it? I mean, the most serious problem that we face today in the United States, or one of the most serious, is that in order to maintain the economy that we have, which is based upon debt and consumption, because of the concentration of wealth, the consumption by ordinary citizens is not enough to drive the economy. And so we have to shift to a military economy in order to keep up consumption and the
wow.
system as it is, and that is leading us into a military dictatorship. And putting Montani's face on it for a little while, I think, serves to distract people from the structural transformation.
Okay, that was a deep point you just made there. You're talking in a big way about major innovations of the capitalist market, which is failing. So they're contriving an economy around even more militarism than we currently have, more surveillance state than we currently have. So
Yeah.
you're actually very you're not bullish on Mamdani. Mamdani represents a lot of people in the progressive kind of Democrat
Mm.
left. They're very excited. If you read some articles from Gloria Guilo has
Right.
represented that he's financed by Soros, yet he did have a
He
hundred
does
thousand
support.
people. Well, he still had 100,000 people knocking on doors to advance
For
his.
sure, for sure.
So there is evidently some authentic grassroots. They're all not fake, and they're all not just from the billionaire class. So I guess let's loop back and just talk a little bit further about the Mamdani
Okay.
Trump meeting as some kind of kabuki theater. But is there anything authentic in this? How cynical should we be? And then I'm going to pull out, and then I'll bring Mark Rollison up to chime in on this. But why don't you guys just, is this just kabuki theater, and is
Maybe,
Momani in with the power structure?
maybe.
Okay. Oh, let's go to, okay, Mark's ready. Let's let Mark chime in. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I didn't watch the actual, conversation between them, so I don't know how outrageous this was. It sounds like it's pretty amazing, but the bottom line is Trump is in a very bad situation right now. He's negative poll numbers, and his name's all over these emails, these Epstein emails. Playing with Clinton's junk or something. It was. I mean, it's pretty bad, and Mandani's clearly got a big popular, movement behind him, people who voted for him. So Trump's acknowledging that, and I think Mandani may well be very compromised at this point. I don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but it's very interesting to know that Eric Adams, the current mayor of New York, is in Israel, putting his hand on the Wailing Wall and wearing a little beanie and saying how he supports Israel. He's not talking about New York or Jews in New York. He's talking about supports Israel and how he's their brother. Of course, Israel's a country that's extremely racist and really doesn't like black people either.
Mark, there's also this issue of Tish, the billionaire heiress,
Right,
remains in the big city
right.
structure. So
Well, that's
obviously,
that's
what's up with that?
well, Tish, her father is a wealthy Zionist billionaire that owns Lowe's Corporation, and of course, he hasn't taken the mayorship, so I guess he could change his tune on this any day. And maybe he's literally afraid of these people. I mean, you have to wonder. I mean, Israel's assassinated a lot of people, and the power structure is such that he might be walking on eggshells, so to speak. But I don't know, and it's the only thing I will say that he came out recently and said he was going to do, and he doesn't actually have to pass any new laws to do it, is he stood in front of this building, where a rental property where it's just a mess, and he's saying that landlords that don't fix their property for their tenants, they're going to be held accountable, because what the city does, I guess if a landlord doesn't, like, say your ceiling, which happened to Jose Vega, all of a sudden has water pouring out of it, like raw sewage pouring onto your floor, and you've already told the landlord that there's this big bubble in the ceiling, and they don't come in and do anything about it, even once the sewage is on the floor. You can complain to the city, and then the city basically gives them a warning and says fix it, and if they don't fix it, there's a court order, and then if it still doesn't get done, the city comes in and fixes it. And this is existing New York laws that don't actually get enforced, I guess, is what they're not being enforced. And then once the city comes in and does the repairs, they charge the landlord, and if the landlord can't pay it, then they can take their property, basically. I mean, it could potentially lead to foreclosure. And of course, the right wing pundits were saying how this was communism, Madani's going to take away their property, and oh my God. But if he actually does something like this, which is not, extraordinary, it's just enforcing existing laws, that would actually be huge. And it's amazing that we have laws in the books throughout our government that are not enforced, like the Leahy law, should have kicked in 2 years ago and we would have stopped sending arms to Israel.
Right.
So I don't know what to make about, Bandani meeting with Trump, except, he's obviously the mayor of a big city, and Trump's a New Yorker, and I think it's almost unavoidable. And yeah, Trump is, I think when you actually get in Trump's face close enough, he's not as big a bully as you might think. He talks a tough game, but it's like, if you're standing in his face, he's not quite as aggressive.
I think Mark, you really got you nailed it when you said that the Donald is aligning himself with a winner,
Right.
and he's accommodating what Donald is a social genius, I think, around playing to the populace and so on. And he's and he knows, given that Tish remains in a very powerful position, New York City is a billionaire's city,
Right. Right.
and you know that Mandani, who knows history, knows that if you go too far, you get killed. So,
Right.
there's this natural accommodation that goes on. I honestly don't know how cynical to be about him. I mean, I have to confess that you know I'm drawn to him. He's compelling, and
Right.
but I know people that thought Bill Clinton was very compelling when he ran
He
for
was.
office, and Obama is very compelling, and so on. So we're all taken in. But and let's think about our next topic tonight.
Does Amanda want to chime in on this?
Yeah, Amanda did post in the chat, and if she wanted to kind of
Yeah, I
yeah.
just wanted to see what you all thought. I haven't done a whole lot of research on this, but the House passed a resolution denouncing the horrors of socialism,
Right.
reaffirming that socialist policies are fundamentally incompatible with America's founding principles. That happened today. Salazar, I guess, Rep. Salazar introduced it from Florida. I'm guessing she's a Republican, but like
Right.
86 Democrats voted. And it was just,
Right.
I want to use the word ironic. I know that what people misuse that word notoriously,
Right.
but that Mamdani was in the White House and
Right.
Trump was starting to say, oh, and then it just, the contradiction there is kind of stark. And
Right.
Yeah.
Well, is this, Amanda, do you think this was purposefully done to slap down Mamdani and advance the divide and conquer tactical play by power structure to keep people on edge?
yeah, I mean, I don't know if that they really did they timed it this way. I mean, they might have timed the vote, but I think whether or not Mamdani went to the White House, they might have passed something like this anyways, as just because we're in that Red Scare kind of atmosphere. Right. So this is, I mean, it feels like so many people see through this at this point because of Mamdani's popularity. So yeah, I mean, maybe it is, it's like they're trying so hard that it makes them look weak. I don't know who they're fooling, but fundamentally incompatible with America's founding principles. I mean, FDR served more terms than any other president. He created the middle class. Our transportation system is a result of social policies. Our
public school system
exactly, yes,
is a socialist project.
Exactly.
On account of the fact that the commons own those buildings.
Yeah.
And so it becomes it's a silly exercise.
Yeah.
To advance the word socialism. Nancy Pelosi is a communist. I've heard the Donald call her that, right? So these words have become so emptied; they're almost meaningless. And again, I think I think about Kabuki theater as that this is just another case of that. Go ahead.
But what are the purposes of that? Say calling Nancy Pelosi socialist or communist is to degrade the meaning of the term, right? It's like leftist, right? To call, Pelosi or Obama or Biden leftist, right? These they're not leftists in any traditional sense, and by destroying that alternative, sort of like an Orwellian sense, you're emptying out the significance from the word, so it doesn't mean anything. It just means people you don't like are called leftists or radical left. But there was, in fact, the leftist tradition with international workers of the world, or there were people who had the perspective, who were actually concerned with these critical issues like who owns what and how they use it, how they push forth different ideologies for their own interests. And that's what you're losing, right? You're going for these sort of like supports Israel, supports Palestine, as opposed to analysis of how infrastructure is controlled, how land is controlled, how money is controlled, how ideology is manipulated, and how we're involved in this enormous sort of corporate takeover, I mean, basically of everything. And so, if you see it in that context, you could just say that the Mandani Trump was an enormous distraction to keep people from like actually looking at what's actually happening.
Right.
I
I
think
will add one more thing note on that. Or Mark, did you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
I see what you're saying about the kabuki theater aspect and destroying the meaning of the words, but I also think I kind of saw a more nefarious aspect of it as well, in that reaffirming that socialism is fundamentally incompatible with America's founding principle. I mean, they're basically saying care, shared interest,
right,
community is fun. I mean, it's propagating propaganda, anti, social. I mean, the word social is in socialism, right? Like, it's just the way that they were criticizing empathy. It's more of that, and it makes, I think of it as like capitalism is scared. People are more open right now to socialism when things get like they were in the Great Depression. When things get bad enough, people start thinking, hey, maybe we really do need each other. Maybe it's not such a bad idea. And so there is a sense of really trying to discount the idea that there could be another way. I mean, we've done regime changes in the interest of squelching potential socialist-ish policies. And so on one hand, there's the theater aspect. And then on the other hand, it is part of this sort of larger suppression of more, to me, human good, societally good policies. So,
well, I just want to let me, Amanda, I'm going to quickly interject, and then we'll go to Mark. And I'll just say, I think you're onto something when you observe that they're essentially attacking a word and an idea of the shared and common interest and the public interest is what. And the word socialism for the people on the right means control and authoritarianism and totalitarianism. And I wish they would just say that and be clear and precise with their language. But mind you, we're moving into AI, robotics. The human is becoming obsolete in this high-tech, technocratic, what I think is emerging techno-totalitarian society. So I think there is a conditioning of a massaging of the argument by having the Congress bring this thing that says socialism is blah blah. It's anathema to what is American values, and it's like that's the most silly kind of assertion as to call Nancy Pelosi a Marxist. And we are in an Orwellian age where language is emptied of meaning.
Well, it's in a way, it's like the thief in the marketplace yelling, "Stop thief!" Right?
Yeah.
The classic sort of political move. So, I mean, what the Trump administration is doing, I mean, I don't want to use the word socialist, but it's different than previously sort of Republican far right groups in that it sees government as a positive, that it's going to restructure government and then use government as a hammer to smash, society. So that's the whole Project 2025 agenda, right? Is government is good, and that was their appeal to all these whatever millenarian was it Christian millenarians was that now government will be good because we're going to get rid of all the other parts of government that are that are getting in the way, and government is just going to be security, immigration, intelligence, and police.
Should we go to Mark Rollison? You had a thought, and then
Right.
Shane, you might have a reflection on what you've
Okay.
heard.
Well, I look at this resolution and this is kind of I guess you could say fascists never liked socialists or communists, and they're total opposites. But the reality is what these people are pretty stupid, I would say, that passed this resolution, because if you look at what the military industrial complex is, or the defense industry, it's essentially like a government's jobs program. It wouldn't survive a day on its own. It's not part of any so-called free market. I mean, even though people make money on stocks, from Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, and the same's true with Obamacare. It's a way to prop up the healthcare industry by giving them paying for part of people's health insurance. So it's corporate welfare. All this stuff is corporate welfare. So the idea is what you really have in this country is socialism works quite well as far as the oligarchs are concerned when it's done for the rich. We have, when the market crashes, they come in and bail out the banks and everything. We have socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor. So it just shows how stupid these people are that are ruling our government. And it kind of makes you think the only reason people that get elected that are this stupid is because they represent corporate interests, and corporate interests don't want people that can actually think for themselves, because then they wouldn't go along with it.
That's quite accurate.
Shane, do you have a thought on what you've heard? Any reflections?
Yeah, for me, we're going to find that the more topics that we discuss, for me, it always comes back to not the Department of Education as an institution, but just education as an idea, what people know, how they express their ideas. Do we know what words mean? To Amanda's point, I think it's 100% accurate to say that what this resolution said our founding principles were is almost the complete opposite. It's like these people are ignorant of that. What Chuck said, it's a Orwellian degradation of language. This is a common authoritarianism playbook thing, is words don't really, or they mean the opposite, and nobody knows what the words mean. It's unclear. And to me, it almost seems like when little kids learn four-letter words and they don't know what they mean, but they know it gets a reaction out of people, and they'll say them because they know their peers will find them in higher regard because they're using words that are maybe taboo. But they have no idea what it means. The kid who's saying it doesn't know what it means. He certainly can't verify that it applies to the person he's saying it about. And the people who are impressed with him saying it don't know what it means either. They just, our four-letter words here, the equivalent. You got Marxist, you got leftist, you got socialist, you got communist. None of the people who use them can define them. They just know it's bad. Just, in the last 5 years, we saw CRT, critical race theory, went through like a 2-year phase, and then it was woke. And if you asked any of these people, what do you mean? What are you talking about? They'd shut up. That's how you get them to be quiet, is you just ask them for a definition, and they don't know. And it's, what do words mean? What did history look like? So when we hear a word, we can associate it with an idea, and then we can evaluate it through a historical lens if what's being said actually applies to history as we know it. And it's like three facets where the education system has just failed society the ability to do that.
Okay, let me jump in then and riff off of Amanda's point about, the the act from Congress to say socialism is anathema and contrary to American values, which I think we can dismiss as silly and nonsense, and a case of divide and conquer, schema, kabuki theater. But in the end, um, well, I mean, there's two ways we can go in our conversation. I would assert, given the advent of AI and this emerging techno-totalitarian society, that we, the people, need to be thinking of how we can expand our commons. And the commons will be financed through the sharing of wealth, the distribution of wealth, however that gets accomplished. So we absolutely need to expand our commons. We need to spend more money on education, more money on healthcare, more money on our health and well-being, more money on the social value of life and the ecological value of life. So that's where I'm at with this. I have no problem with an expanded commons, and it's commons does not mean authoritarian, totalitarian nonsense, which is a terror, a fear by people on the right wing of that I think becomes verging on irrational in the way they somehow represent stuff. But let's go back to what is an American value. And American values, in one of the conversations Emmanuel, Mark, and I have had is like, how do we think about the Constitution? Do we throw the whole darn thing out and start anew? Emmanuel is against throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and there are
Mark
values.
too.
Yeah, Mark too. I think we're in a consensus that there are arguments that could be made from and appealing to the Constitution for American values. And so recently, the Donald had that asinine remark about trying for sedition and treason members of Congress that advanced a resolution that told or counseled and reminded, let's say, military personnel, service members, that they took an oath to the Constitution first.
God, the president.
They also have a duty to follow their commander in chief. And the challenge is they have to discern lawful from unlawful orders. So, and I think that was a very powerful thing of that Congress member to stand on. And we have a constitution, we have rules about treason, we have a guarantee clause, the Fourth Amendment, the fourth section of the Constitution is the function of government is to defend and look out for the general welfare. And it says how that's going to be accomplished. And so I have all kinds of argument that very bad that members of Congress are not following that duty. There's a guarantee clause. Now, we're not going to go into I'm not a lawyer of constitutional expertise in any way, but I think that was a very telling display of ignorance and totalitarian audacity on the part of the Donald, saying publicly that a congressperson should be hanged. He said that they should be killed by the power of state. This guy is unhinged. I guess Susie Wiles is the chief staff. I'm sure she got hold of that. She commanded that Levitt, is that the mouthpiece? The blonde who quickly said, no, that's what he said is wrong. They just dismiss it. They backpedal. And again, here's where I'm going to close. The targeting of those boats, those powerful speedboats that are flying around in the southern Caribbean, north of Venezuela, that the Donald has commanded be shot, be attacked, be blown up. Okay, beyond a doubt, that's an unlawful order. He doesn't know who those are. He doesn't know what they're carrying. There's been boats with people filled with them. But here's what's the tell for me and I'll go down a rabbit hole on this one. these boats are reportedly being targeted with Hellfire missile, not Hellfire. They're targeted with missiles that are intended to blow up a tank.
Mhm.
But if you notice, when the blow hits, there's a percussion, there's a concussive event, waves emit, but the boat is not splintered. The boat doesn't blow up. The boat doesn't sink. It just sets on fire, much like we saw in the Lahaina fires with those melted cars. So in effect, they are using energy weapons on
Mhm.
these boats. So we have a two-tiered kind of criminal event. We have, you know, just paramilitary actions from the USA targeting blowing up these boats or igniting them on fire is the better way to be clear here. So
Right.
I'm incensed, and I think that I think we should be bringing treason charges against federal officials that are conducting themselves like the Donald does. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
But
Well,
go ahead, Emmanuel. I really went
I
off.
just want to say about government. So um, I think the best way to see those threats that were made was it's the first step, but it's not the first step actually. Stephen Miller was the first one who said that Democrats were terrorists. But this is a slight acceleration of that.
That's right.
But the primary point is not really about Donald Trump, but it's rather the effort to turn ICE and other parts of the military into essentially mercenary forces. And that was, I guess, recently backed up when it was disclosed that ICE immigration customs had uh, in their new budget, they were purchasing guided missiles. So this is not normally what immigration would have
Wow.
in its stockpile. But there are other indications too that where essentially ICE is being used combined with other parts of the military to create a sort of command control system,
Yeah.
which would serve as a private army. I don't think it's Donald Trump's personal private army, but it's a private army for various forces, and that this discussion about whether the you could refuse orders that were unconstitutional is part of an invisible but profoundly dangerous breaking up of the established order in the United States within the military itself, and that has been going on since Trump came into office and dismissed 20 uh, generals off the top. And then we had Joseph Nye and who's the other one? The other former sort of ranking sort of top person, but they died unexpectedly. At the same time that all these generals are being dismissed. So there's been an effort to sort of clear the deck, and then there was that lecture by Hegseth and Trump to all the generals, telling them basically better follow what we tell you. And we're going to the next stage here, which is
Well, so Emmanuel, let me
mhm,
interject. Are you saying that the Congress people that brought the memo
mhm.
to the military service, reminding them that they took an oath to the Constitution and not to the commander in chief, is that a Kabuki theater event, or do you think
No,
there's an authentic?
I think it's real. I mean, well, there may
Okay,
be kabuki as well, but there is a real split within the military between those who think they're supposed to follow, what the military does in
blindly,
theory, and
blindly.
those who are increasingly being bought off and brought into this sort of ICE, Homeland Security, and now HEGSEF, who are basically a loyalty structure. But I don't think the loyalty is not to Trump per se. That Trump could be asked over Epstein or health or whatever to step down next week, and we'll have Vance, which I'm sure will be a tremendous improvement over Trump.
This is bleak.
Oh my God.
But what do others think about this appeal to? I mean, if we're in the movement, uh, a freedom movement, liberation movement, movement for a better society, do we align ourselves with what these Congress people came out and said about following the oath and examining what that oath means? And what is the preamble of what is the state? What does the mean to look out for the general welfare? Because everything that Donald is doing is being done in the name of national security, right?
Right. Well, that's the word national security, that was used against Martin Luther King and anybody that was a threat to the power structure. So the fact that they're going to use the word national in the interest of national security is kind of, they always say that that's been going on for decades. But Trump,
but that's their key rationale.
Right? That's their key rationale for all kinds of wars like that are halfway around the world. It's in the interest of national security. Of course, we know darn good.
And judges, thankfully, have shown an inclination to strike that down and say, you haven't defended that claim. There's no justification for invoking a national emergency on everything from National Guards in different cities to some of the tariffs. There's 3 or 4 different spheres that I've seen judges in the last month say, yeah, that was national security was Trump's rationale for doing it. And they said, no, the facts don't support it. So that's
right.
Seems to be getting called out now.
If we replace national security with corporate interests, then it all makes sense.
Right.
Exactly.
Then they're being honest, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, yeah, I think that if you look at the preamble of the Constitution, it talks about it's the general welfare of the people. So I think you could make the argument that socialism is not really incompatible at all with the United States founders. But in any case, what's going on in Venezuela, there's actually big protests. I guess it happened in Philadelphia, and they're starting to happen around the country because people are wondering when's this war going to break out? And so far, the United Nations has declared it violation of international law to be knocking these little boats out of the water with whatever they're doing, missiles or energy weapons. But who's actually stopping the United States from doing it? No one. There's nobody's willing to put sanctions on the U.S. or stand up to them, and we have to wonder what. I guess there was a cargo plane from Russia that landed in Venezuela a few weeks ago, and we have to wonder what was on that plane. Hopefully, some hypersonic missiles so they can sink one of our aircraft carriers. But
well, I mean, China and Russia and other countries have sold a lot of weapons to Venezuela, and my understanding is they're reasonably well prepared.
I don't think they're going to jump into hell too much because I think Russia's obviously still involved in Ukraine, and the this whole thing about Venezuela. It's a socialist country where socialism has actually worked very well to help the population down there, using the oil revenues to for create, housing and education and feed people. So it's actually it's the way to get invaded by the United States is they have the largest oil reserve in the world, and be a socialist country. And then if you're not on the petrodollar, which I think Venezuela probably was, because it was dealing with us directly, but at one time. That's the third way, and Syria, of course, was not on the petrodollar. So that's how you get invaded by the United States. It's not nothing to do with, the United States tries to claim, it's a matter of national security, or this country's leader is a dictator, is what they're saying about Maduro, and that's what they said about Assad and and Saddam Hussein and down the line. But I think this Congress will not impeach Trump, and not only will and they won't. Well, they may impeach Trump at some point, but I think at this point they're not even going to stop him from doing what he's doing in Venezuela. The Democrats have not been incredibly adamant about this, even though they've commented on the fishing boats, that as being the wrong, but they're not really passing any real strong resolutions against it or And I think the whole Congress, you know, that they go along with regime change, whether they're Democrats or Republican. They're all getting paid off by the arms industry. You know, that they're not particularly good at keeping us out of wars, either party.
Mm-mm.
And they're both really beholden, I would say, to the state of Israel, which is, you know, you look at the breakdown of Congress and the number of people in Congress that have actually taken APAC money, it's huge. And so we have a foreign power that's really running our government, and it's developing a lot of these weapons that are being used. You know, the drone.
Israeli agents don't have to register with FARA. They're not considered as foreign agents by the U.S. government.
Right. Yeah. APAC doesn't have to register under the FARA Act. And even though they made RT America, which is a media outlet, registered under the FARA Act, but these guys, and they're making members of Congress are not making it, but any member of Congress they're asking to take a pledge to be loyal to Israel.
Right.
And if they take the pledge, then they get all kinds of money and stuff, and they even get according to Thomas Massey, they get a babysitter, they get an APAC handler. You know, but you've got this foreign influence and then you've got things like Pegasus software that's coming out of an Israeli company and all this other stuff that's coming out of Israel, or it's being tested on the battlefield in Gaza.
Well, hey, Mark, should the billionaire class that functions as transnational globalist be considered a foreign power?
Hmm.
Well, I think if you know if right now that the and you can certainly tie a lot of the global elite into Israel. I mean,
Absolutely.
some of them are Zionists themselves, but a
Absolutely.
lot of them are you know involved in, like Google is involved in the genocide, and so is Amazon with the cloud sharing, and you know Microsoft. All these companies are somehow benefiting from what Israel's doing.
Right.
But so they factor into it. They're complicit in it, you can say. But I think that the Mossad and has become a very dangerous entity, and Israel itself has infiltrated the whole media. Like, well, they're actually been losing public opinion since October 7th. You know, the people around the world, I guess, you know, the majority of people around the world do not support what Israel's doing in Gaza or the West Bank. But they know they're losing the information war. So what are they doing? They've got Larry Ellison buying up CBS, now you call it ZBS, with the Zionist broadcast network, with Barry Weiss as the editor, and they're they bought up TikTok too. So they're trying to like get back a hold of the narrative.
It sounds like they're consolidating their power, Mark.
Well, it's the eighth front of the war, and they've essentially lost that front of the war, but they're trying to gain it back by buying stuff up. Is it going to work? I don't think it's going to work, because I think at this point, you know, they say Arab governments are very much in bed with the Israel, but
Right.
the people are hopping mad in those countries at what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. And so there's not, and it's like that across Europe. And of course, Germany is a complete authoritarian state where the people do not support what's going on in Gaza, and then the government goes in and cracks down on protests. And you know,
Right.
Germany is a very authoritarian country, and it's becoming more militaristic. Anyway, I probably went on too long, so I'll let somebody else go.
Amanda, do you have a thought? And then let's go to Shane. I mean, what are you reflecting on from what you've heard this evening, Amanda?
I was just thinking about the Venezuela, well, about how back in March when they took the 238 Venezuelans and they videotaped it, and they're supposedly from Tren de Araguas, which we don't know for sure. And then there was like
Oh, yeah.
something like 30 from some other supposed gang.
MS-13.
Thank you. Yeah, MS-13. And there was a Brago who was, you know, supposedly. Anyways, they showed that video, And, everything feels, I think someone's already said it, but everything's that they're doing is like normalizing what 5 years ago would have been unthinkable. And
Right.
showing that video, actually, if they had not showed that video, I mean, it was the president of El Salvador posted it on Twitter, and then it was either Rubio or Vance that reshared it, and I watched it, and it actually humanized the people. You saw their emotions in their face. The people that they, the 200 people that they arrested, they showed them shaving their heads and stripping them down. I mean, it was like if they hadn't showed that video, it would have been this abstract concept of people, gang members getting taken to a prison sort of, but it actually made it very visceral. So it had the opposite effect as intended.
Well, wait, Amanda, it had the opposite effect intended on you.
On me, right? You're right. So right, and so, but what I'm worried about is that they're trying to desensitize people to Venezuelans. So that was like what, and whether they planned it all from then, but now they're bombing people just randomly, and it feels like they're trying to desensitize the American public to Venezuelans because they've been planning to invade Venezuela for a while. Or they've even tried. I don't know. I'm not a history wizard on this topic, but
you're right. The Venezuelans are gangbangers. That's
everybody knows that.
That's what they're trying to
demonstrate.
And it's the other thing that came to mind was this idea of building a fortress state and climate change being a big driver behind the behind all of this. So just dehumanizing people from the South in general, right? So we have a big fortress state. You can just shoot people trying to get into the country. I mean, that's where my brain goes, is they want to get to a state where there's people at a wall along the United States and we're in like Mad Max craziness, and they're just like, there's no human rights anymore. You can just that's where my brain goes in like sort of the 20-year period. And whatever we can do to humanize people, to push in the opposite direction. Anyway, those are the things that came up for me. It's kind of dark, but
no,
and then when you think, well, what are the people who are playing this all like a chess game doing, right? They're thinking about the water and the land, and what do we do when we run out of resources? Let's buy it all up now, and winner takes all kind of strategy.
Yeah.
And whatever the I think the more awake that the American, clearly they're worried, or they wouldn't be going to this effort to try to dehumanize people, because they know that if enough Americans say this is an unlawful war, they can't really do it. If enough Americans don't want it, like Vietnam, we could stop it. 9/11, we all got freaked out. We all got scared. We kind of let them get away with it. And then, it lasted 20 years. But I don't think that'll happen.
But can we stop it just because Americans don't like it? I would say that I don't know if I would agree with that.
Oh, what's the old saying? What if they declared a war and nobody showed up?
Well, you look at what's gone on in Gaza. There's people all over that really, a lot of people object. They say that you take a poll on Israel and Palestine, that majority of Americans have a negative view of Israel, and as in the younger demographics, like both younger Republicans and younger Democrats, it's like 75% or more of even young Republicans don't approve of what Israel's doing. So and we're still giving them weapons, and it's and letting them destroy Gaza. Israel's disobeying the ceasefire. Nothing's really being done.
But people are waking up to it in the middle of a 50, 70 year
Right.
situation, whereas Venezuela's an I mean, I don't yeah, there's no I don't know how it
Right.
will play out, but and it's also the proximity. It's closer to us. Um People are here probably more likely to have traveled down south. Um
Yeah, I think that with Venezuela, they've been telling lies about Maduro and being a dictator that's stealing elections, and people aren't really questioning that narrative at all. And but they if American soldiers are being killed, it's going to be a different story. The reason I think that they had those, they showed those people in Sikot, the death camp that they took all the immigrants to in El Salvador, was an intimidation tactic for the entire U.S. population to say, "Hey, look what we're doing to
yes.
these people. We can do this to you." And of course, this goes back to 9/11 and Guantanamo. So everything that happened under Bush that Obama didn't, reverse. It's just been a gradual step in this direction where we finally have Trump, and Trump is the only thing that's kind of been redeeming is the fact that the courts have pushed back on a lot of this stuff, because I think if the courts weren't pushing back on it, he would have done a lot more at this point.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm not. I mean, I think people are playing Trump. I think he's an easy person to play, but I don't know that he's quite the puppet that so many of our other um, politicians are, just because he's so cartoonishly villainous. Like he does the things by natural instinct that you would usually have to pay someone lots and lots of money to, if you saw somebody doing this, you'd be like, sure. I mean, nobody does that on their own. They've got to be in somebody's pocket, whatever. And that's just like Tuesday morning before breakfast for him to be like, oh yeah, we should hang all these people who want to follow the Constitution, and we're going to invade Greenland and steal Panama. And I want to, let's move the pyramids over to Mar-a-Lago and paint them gold. And like, I think there's so many of the things that he just does. And I heard, I don't remember who it was today talking about it. They said the three primary characteristics of narcissists is charm, rage, and like woe is me kind of self-pity. And you can see him cycle. You saw the charm on full display today with Mondani. You saw the rage that he flies into on a regular basis. It verbally came out on the plane when he called that reporter a piggy, and then the constant whining. I mean, he cycles through the three main characteristics of a narcissist that prompt him to do things that align with the private globalist national corporations. They're like, man, I wish somebody would do that. Um, I think there's some overlap, just his natural inherent tendencies to just be a bonkers cartoon villain. And some of the things that these people are hoping to achieve gives the impression that they're actually controlling him. And I'm sure there's some overlap. I know the tech bros and all the people who are, sending them crypto dollars and paying the $5 or $5 million dinner plates down at Mar-a-Lago. I'm sure they have some motives, but I don't think he takes quite the persuading that people with of sounder mind would take.
I I had a thought, not articulated, but that makes a lot of sense. I feel that similar. There's these interests that are aligning right now, but they're not necessarily intentionally coordinating every single thing. It's almost like he has this intuition about that just almost naturally aligns. Well, yeah, and just the whole deregulation and
this is a point that I tend to make a lot in my writings, is that because we have such a storytelling centric idea of events, whether it's through a book or a movie, we tend to think of things in terms of the protagonist and the antagonist. And anytime we're evaluating like current events and we're going, all right, well, who's really in control? We go, well, we the people are the good guys, and then who is the antagonist? And we kind of think that it's not maybe one individual, but one collective entity of similar mind, and the real world is complicated where you've got people doing self-serving things for because they're psychotic, and then other people doing it because they're money driven, and then other people doing it for religious ideals, and then other people want it for power. And there tends to be a whole lot of overlap in these Venn diagrams of structure. But I think trying to figure out who the person is, maybe this is why they always say they don't want you to know because it's plural.
Right.
Well, it is I am convinced, I accept that the they is this plutocratic power structure. And I'm using the word plutocracy. I hang out with people in the truth movement that don't like the word plutocracy because maybe they comfortable with oligarchy, and some are saying, well, let's call it the predator class. And, but, you know, I'm coming to a point as a populist and where the institution of the billionaires and the millionaires is obsolete for we the people to have a democracy.
Hmm.
And that just like a city will zone how tall a building you could build in a certain area, they are essentially zoning how money and wealth would be, applied. Then so do we the people need to in effect zone out of existence this plutocratic class that is the same, which is the banking cartels. There's a long history, and people trace this to, secret societies, ancient history, but I don't go there. I mean, it's an interesting kind of discussion, but the real practical matter is, we need a public electoral system where no one owns it. We the people need to own the systems of making electricity because electricity is air to civilization. And why should we be renters to a class of billionaire that, ineffectively exploit us? And, so this is how I think about these kinds of things. But I think we need to, I'm an advocate for, um, calling out kind of going for the jugular by calling out the malfeasance, by pointing out where Dick Cheney, uh,
Hmm.
has committed treason in his conduct under 9/11 and his conduct under the 2003 Iraq War. I wrote an obit to Cheney at my Chuck Fall Substack, and you know, um, uh, you know, it's what needs to be said, and I think part of what we do in our movement is normalize talking in a rational way about power structure. And again, I'll close with this, that I think that we need to be speaking about creating a commons, which would essentially be a socialized, aspects of society. 40% of the housing in Vienna is owned by the city, and the city rents it out, and you're a renter to the city. And it's it's tied to your percentage of income, things like this. So it's affordable. But then 60% of the other housing is, private market. So I see two things where ultimately the billionaires will need to give up their billions. We could ask them, they just need to kind of give it up because we're done with you.
Right.
You've had generations to make the good society, but all you've done is spoil things with your relentless application of high tech into the plastics, the petroleums, all the effluences, and now you're putting all the AI on us like we're asking for it and like we need it. we really don't. And so these are, and then so meanwhile, the
Yep.
second bifurcated economy, there would be a free market economy where people,
Well,
freely.
wait a minute. What's a free market?
Well, I am actually, as a libertarian, I could see a pretty free darn market where there aren't. See, I don't. There's the free market of the guy or gal who, goes to college and develops themselves into, or goes to trade school, or builds a craft and a trade, and then goes into the marketplace and hangs their shingle and says, I'm available to build a house for you. I'm available to do this for you. I'm available to teach. All these kinds of things.
Right. But there's no such thing as, I would argue there's no such thing as a true free market because
And
all markets have to have rules.
And in the end, there's absolutely going to be rules about, accountability and measuring up and giving what you say you're giving and these kinds of things. But I'm imagining that the most critical thing for us to be doing and talking about is how we build up the commons in our cities and county, local regions so that if something bad happens, those areas are resilient and able to continue. I think
Right.
every city should know where the goodies are coming from that are keeping people alive. In other words, are you buying wheat from the California Valley, and you're in Tennessee, okay? Or, I mean, I think we should have
Right.
these kinds of very open, transparent, um, you know, being a farmer apparently is really hard. And, there should be kind of social guarantees for them, to be providing for us. And so instead, I'm imagining a post-capitalist society where it's very rational and based on mutual aid and solidarity and and nobody likes waste. Nobody likes value and wealth to be squandered. And so there would be measures for that. And I don't know quite what that would look like, but I think it's not that different than what we have right now, if you think about it.
Well, most cities, I think, are getting their goods from outside of
The
often, a
re
lot of them outside of the state, some of them outside the country.
Yeah.
So if everything really goes to hell, there could easily be a famine because, not everybody's well equipped. Not everybody has a good garden. There are local farmers, but could they possibly begin to feed the population? I
No,
don't
of course not.
think they could.
No,
But as far as the billionaires go, I mean, you look at FDR's presidency, and he was called a communist by the the oligarchs or the robber barons of the time, and he wanted to have a individual bill of rights, which would have been a right to a good job, right to an education, right to housing, right to health care. And that was, and then he died, of course. But so he had a vision that was much more radical and socialist than Bernie Sanders, for example, ever had. But it's, I think that he was one of these few people that have come along, and he came from wealth himself, but that's actually stepped in American politics in a leadership position like a president and said, this can't continue down this path. But the problem is he allowed capitalism to survive, and it eventually just, regenerated itself, and the billionaires degraded the unions and got rid of all the opposition that was there in the labor movement, and they've continued to just get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And Congress has allowed them to, starting with Reagan and the tax cuts under Reagan, and then of Bush, and just to get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And we never should have allowed that to happen. We should have limited the amount of money they could make, and limited and had minimum wages should have gone up proportionally. And in a lot of ways, I understand why socialism is maybe the answer, because if workers controlled the means of production instead of the oligarchs, then the wealth would be more evenly distributed.
Yeah, I mean I was this just circling back to that our first topic about the House resolution, and that's the image that people have of socialism or communism is when the state really becomes an I mean, the only difference between fascism and people's image of communist totalitarianism is that in fascism, it's more of a merger between corporations and state, whereas communism, it's just state and a few of their buddies. But it's basically, they're both totalitarian,
Right.
independent of whether it's communist or capitalist or anything. And so, yeah, we haven't seen a lot of purely socialist success stories. I think partly because people use it as a way to get power, and then they're actually corrupt. And, it's something that's easily corrupted because it sounds so good. The bad guys come in and, convince people they're going to be like, for the worker, and then they're not.
But Amanda,
yeah, but the workers, it's like almost like a co-op kind of model. You could think of it that way. Like that's the closest we have to.
But Amanda, when you use the word socialism, you weren't imagining an authoritarian.
No. But I think that's when they use that word. That's what people are thinking. Yeah, and
I think this is kind of back to the theme of language being distorted.
Yeah.
And so the whole word socialism is so charged. It's freighted with, negative connotation. And the one is total, because of the Russian, the Chinese, the Khmer, whatever, the Pol Pot and all that terrible, stuff.
It's been abused. It's been used. People have, just like Christianity was actually something that came up the other day. Christianity, Jesus's teachings about helping the poor and loving your brother and your neighbor. It's been, one of the most beautiful things has been used for some of the most evil stuff in the world. And so I think that's why we see communism, things done in the name of communism that are so dark. That's not what I grew up, even when I was 14, I had a rudimentary understanding of it. And it was like, communism is a good idea. And it implemented, it hasn't worked. And then the conditioning or the propaganda was that it can't work just because it failed a few times. It can't work.
But has it really failed? I mean, I think if you looked at the Soviet Union, for example, before the Soviet Union, you had the people living under the Tsar were largely illiterate. They couldn't read. They were poor, and the Soviet Union brought a lot of people out of poverty. I mean, Ukraine, for example, the state of Ukraine under the Soviet Union those were the technocrats where they built the rockets and the ships, and after the fall of the Soviet Union, all those people fell into poverty. Putin actually was successful because under Yeltsin, poverty went from 3 million during the Soviet Union to 90 million with a life expectancy of 56 years old for a male under Yeltsin. So Putin actually, revitalized the economy, reinvested in it, and created the Russian middle class. But ultimately, I mean, I think when you look at China, that's, even though they have a capitalist aspect to it, that's a success story that they brought. I don't know how many people. What is it? It's like 800 million people, over 800 million people out of poverty.
Yeah, I mean, they prioritize the community. But is that even social? I mean, do the workers own their own means of? I mean, it depends.
Yeah, you're right.
There's so many different definitions. I mean, it depends if we're talking about the sort of colloquial definition or the technical.
Right. Yeah, the state ends up owning a lot of it.
Is really state. It is sort of an authoritarian.
Well, I'm under the impression actually,
but for the collective.
What's happened in China, because I've listened to Michael Hudson a bit about this, is is actually corporations are private. The companies that make goods, and regardless of what kind of goods they are, those are private companies. The things that are nationalized, and China keeps nationalized, are things like the power company, the electric and water, and the banking, for example. Things that are really part of the commons, which actually benefits in healthcare, of course, that benefits industry in a way to not have to pay for your employees' healthcare, or to have to pay a high utility bill.
Well, to Amanda's point, because I spent many years in China. My parents were missionaries when I was growing up, and that's one of the things that the Western families always used to say was communism sounds great on paper. There's passages in the Bible where it said the new believers, they got together and they shared everything they had, each as they needed, everyone according to their need. I'm like, there's a description of it right there. There's no condemnation from on high about it, but they would point to things like the Cultural Revolution and the people that Mao killed and the millions that died. And they're picking out the authoritarian aspects of corrupt leaders that isn't indicative of the ideology, just like Amanda was talking about Christianity. There's a lot of people that were just, if you mention it to them, they'd be turned off because they associate it with the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition. Those are like the two things, and they hear Christian values, they're like, I don't want anything to do with that. And it's like, no, there's nothing in Christianity, the faith, that compels you, to go torture people and, burn witches and try to take over Palestine. That's just, those are bad ideas that people who had noble intentions but poor execution, they went and did it, but it's not really a fair representative of the faith, just like the corrupt authoritarians that have like implemented this against people's wills. It's not a fair it's not fair to judge it on those standards. But again, when people go, it's never worked. I always say, when you're trying to judge whether or not something worked, you have to define in advance what it was trying to do. Um, you know, Earmuffs make terrible shoes, and shoes make poor gloves. What are you trying to accomplish? I mean, China has had for a long time about four times the population of America in roughly the same land size. So they've had different challenges. They've had a multi-thousand year tradition that they've managed to keep intact. They've made more technological progress probably in the last 2 decades than we have. I mean, when we lived there at the end of the 80s, early 90s, they were still stuck in the 50s. And then I went back in 99, 10 years later, and they had jumped forward like a half a century in that brief amount of time. And a whole lot of it is this culturally, we're individuals, but we do have to work together as a society for the better good. And one of the best examples I saw of this was during COVID. There was a time lapse video of like a 10-story hospital that they built in. It was a matter of weeks. It was less than a month. I don't remember if it was two weeks or 3 weeks, but it's all these people coming together, and you're like, Americans could build that and it would take 3 years, 2.5 years to be fighting bureaucratic red tape and making it like a bunch of people would have to get pieces of the pie. And that what we call an ineffective or a not working mentality shows us what's possible in a very short period of time when it's not somebody's private interest profit that's driving the productivity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
There was a a truck fire underneath an overpass in the Bay Area, in the East Bay, near Emeryville, Oakland, and the the um, the fire was so bad. So the truck, it was a tanker truck that crashed right underneath this overpass. So you had these, those complicated two layers, but it would have shut down a key section, and the state Department Highway Authority said, well, it's going to take us 6 months to fix this. No, maybe even 12 months. And then some individual who ran a company, who commanded uh, all the operations, basically somehow insinuated himself into the repair and kicked it out in 6 weeks.
Wow.
Now, and that's individual initiative. And, you know, I hear what you're saying, Shane, about China. It's remarkable what they have accomplished in their capacity to command the economy. And and I have no problem hiring the Chinese to come over and build some bridges for us here. But it's kind of crazy that we can't just in our own way produce them. And you wonder what would a cooperative of workers who are all highly skilled look like in kicking out a bridge construction. I mean, that would be a really interesting kind of competition. Let you know, I mean, if, you're still going to have, even if it's a worker driven bridge construction against a state commanded bridge construction. Um, the bottom line is people are going to be working together no matter
Mhm.
what, you know, and I think
Right.
that's where there's a kind of transcendental humanness to everything that gets built. And the question then is going to be, you know, is it done with dignity? Are the people who are building, you know, dignified, or are they just, you know, widgets themselves? You know what I'm saying? You
Well,
know,
Right.
how do you coach a society up thinking about like the Amish barn raising when they go out and they
yeah,
build one in
there
a
you
day,
go.
and the whole community, every single one from, the strapping men sawing the wood to the little kids are bringing water or something. Everybody's doing something, and it's looked at almost like the way that we look at a holiday. Like nobody's dreading this. This is like a happy, it's almost like the hunt. Like guys get geared up for the hunt, the whole community comes out. Why couldn't a city come out and build a bridge or a hospital or something?
And I totally appreciate that you're pointing to that example, that cities could be doing this, and I think part of our movement needs to be speaking to, you know, the post-capitalist society. And if the city is the mutual aid association of those that live in the region, then you know, one of the jobs of the city is to organize the talent. And, you know, not everybody's going to be able to show up to build a barn, or not everyone's going to show up to build a bridge because, you know, I don't know how to hold a hammer, you know, but I can, you know, hold a pen. So where our duties would be assigned appropriately according to our abilities and our natural talents. And this is what makes life exciting, I think, when we
Mhm.
can start having conversations about building the better society. And you know, the Amish are a fascinating example because some would consider them very authoritarian. You know, they're very strict in their traditional followings of their scriptures, their practices, um, and they have that fascinating practice of letting their children basically go wild, and you choose to come back, you know, and if you know, it's
Mhm.
up to you. And there's all these riffs on that practice of the Amish, and there's people that are in the Amish that leave the Amish but then don't totally leave. They stay close. They've adopted more modern ways. So but I think um it's important that we find the nuance in these kinds of conversations and not get
Yeah.
locked into, you know.
Well, what's there are worker-owned companies, you know, like was it Mondrag in Spain? I think the whole town is worker-owned
Well,
companies. And even in the United States, I knew a friend of mine in Boulder that worked construction, and it was a worker-owned company. Everybody had a share of the company.
well, here in Oregon, there's a company called Winco that's employee owned.
Right.
But someone started that company and would have sold shares to the employees. And um, And so it's an employee owned. I wouldn't know it's any different than a Costco. You know what I'm saying? I mean, functionally, you go in and there's people there and they're helping and they're stocking and they're doing the job of running the operation. So, you know, but I think that uh, I mean I like the idea of worker owned. I also like the idea of a city owning its own water supply and distributing it, at a fair value to the people who live there, and the city owning the electric supply. I mean, why should we be forever slaves to the big corporation that's burning, jet fuel to run the turbines to feed my electrics, whatever,
Right.
and I'm not against private I guess I'm against
Well, actually, if you know
I'm
anything about
against
Dennis,
private equity that's raping and pillaging.
if you
Sorry.
know anything about Dennis Kucinich as a mayor of
Yeah,
Cleveland,
did you
Ohio,
tell us the
he
story?
fought the private utility company because they were trying to take over the municipal power company. They
That's a,
did
that's
everything they could to smear him to try to get him to fold.
that's a great example. Yeah.
What?
This is
Oh, I
Go ahead,
just have
Amanda.
one. I don't want to get too off topic, but it's making me think. Sorry, I just saw the comment in the chat, so I lost my train of thought. About incentives and the narrative. So, like when you were talking about the bridge and having people come together, or to build a bridge, like almost as an experiment, or how in China they built the hospital in weeks, and it really is hard to compare the two countries because the what people are motivated by internally is different there culturally, right? For thousands of years, the sense of and it's not that the people are inherently different, it's just the cultures, it's grown out of the culture over centuries, and a sense of duty to the group, that's motivating, like individually motivating to come together and build this hospital, versus in the United States there's this focus on independence and this being the star and being the I'm a product of this culture, right? Like when something is really like working on my novel, right? Like that's a hard thing to do, but you like have this image of, oh, maybe I'll become a famous author, or J.K. Rowling, or those that's not the only drive, but if it's a cultural thing. So what motivates a person, it's not genetic or biological or human nature, it's cultural, and we've been owned by corporations pretty much from the get-go, and they thrive off of people being motivated by profit. And so this is my long-winded way of saying that it's the narrative that I think is where we can reach these goals, is like, what if we made, if we made it really cool for men to be able to cry? Men would cry all the time. I mean, how like there's the stereotype of men not crying, or it's conditioned out of them. There's maybe nothing inherently in boys that makes them less sensitive. It's a cultural thing. And so if people thought it was the coolest thing in the world to work and not get paid, I know that's, but suddenly everyone's pitching in because, like, well, what fills my ego? What makes me feel like I'm doing a good job in the world? And it's, we just don't have that in the US in the same way, right? It's every man for himself and be a star. The role models are the billionaires, and I'm speaking sort of in extremes, but I don't know if I'm making any sense. But
No, yeah,
like taking control of the narrative, where like my dream is having like a Jim Henson type studio where everybody is working and collaborating together. There's not one person at the top that's dictating everything, but this very communal creative process. And Jim Henson, even though his name was on the business, he really did let people incubate within the company and have their own thing. And the writers would give other writers credits on the show. And there's a lot of communal, even though it was structured like a typical, corporation. And so I think it's more opening people's minds to, oh my gosh, I could be fulfilled by that. You don't have to be the star to be fulfilled, and in fact, it's way more fun when it's not that way. Yeah,
Those are good points. Those are good. I mean, I hear where you're going with.
I'm not the most concise, so if you can summarize better than
No,
me.
you're offering that a cultural value for working together and um and a broad appreciation. And to use the Jim Henson example of a studio, that was very, very creative. And I think society, schools, health,
Yeah,
everything could be organized. And I mean, to suggest that the way we organize ourselves as people would be a cultural expression and not necessarily a business expression is an interesting distinction. And I think I would agree with you that we need to, in our movement, argue for a culture for mutual aid and solidarity, and everyone working to the best of their ability, and getting as they need to develop their skills and become masters of their own individual universe, so they can help and add to others. Is a thought. I think I hear you say. Now Shane's going to peel off. I would say let's wrap up and end our recording.
yeah.
Um, and
Shane,
and let's
let's-
do some closing thoughts.
all right, let Shane go first.
Chuck, I have to tell you, because we were talking about words and degradation of words and how people misuse words. When you were saying earlier about what you call plutocracy and other people in the group call it oligarchy, I wanted to be like, this just sounds like splitting hairs because it's obviously oligarchs. And I had to pull it up and get the definition of the difference. And my definition of oligarch was the plutocrat definition. So I had the wrong definition, and I couldn't for $1 billion have told you the difference. And I'm like, oh no, Chuck does have it right. And the people that are calling them oligarchs, those are wrong. So I do appreciate that in the course of a discussion about the importance of language, I could go find a specific example of how I was using a term wrong or not knowing the correct definition almost led me to push back on something. So I'm glad we could get a real world example there. Um,
Oligarchy is ruled by the few.
right. It's an elite group is what the tiny circle being in the little circle is what gives you your power, and the plutocrats, it's your wealth.
And the word plutocracy was invented. I don't know what was invented, but it was used by people in the 1800s, Americans who were, losing their land to the banking cartels on the East Coast. So I have another friend and another group I participate in who doesn't like the word plutocracy. And I say, but I didn't make it up. I mean, it was made up by, working class Americans and their criticism. And I kind of like the word, just it's the super rich. And one of the topics is, well, how rich do I get to be in the better society? Well, I have a post at the Green Liberty site that's a book review of an author who says, 5 million bucks, most individuals, it's hard to, unless you're a Kardashian, you.
Well, I can say this from being on multiple continents and dozens of countries, the further you get from society, the more socialistic and then communistic people tend to be on their own without outside influence. It just seems to be
Naturally with their
natural.
friends, yeah.
Um, in this, again with the Amish barn raising, I think if a city did want to come and build a bridge, what you'd have is some capitalist going, no, I want that contract. How do we sneak it and get the contract? I know we'll call them socialists. And then, because we were saying, well, how do you get people to want to do something like this? And we have to condition from a young age. Well, one, remove the negative stigma, give the correct definitions, and then make those things, um, make those the focal point instead of getting as rich as you can, get as famous as you can, or get as powerful, because those are the three vices that people chase. What if we had if we could instill at a young age, it's okay to cry if you're a man. It's okay to do some work for free, to go out and do something to help your neighbor and help your community. You get to drive across that bridge too. You're helping yourself get where you need to go the next week faster because of your effort. It's kind of like Horton Hears a Who. If we could instill these kind of values, I think that's how we take more control of our government. And then, decades from now, we're not going to who really controls it like we are today. We're going, how did they get control back from those people? And I think this is how you do it.
That's a clever point. Yeah. Let's go to Mark Rollison and Amanda.
And I got to take off. I'll see you guys.
Hey,
All right.
Bye.
Shane,
Good to see you.
Yeah, Shane. Wow, a lot to cover. I mean, it's yeah, and then where does it all leave us? I think government's about as broken now as it's ever been under Trump, and it's been going steadily downhill, and we've watched this for a very long time. How it's the military industrial complex has a lot of power over our government. We spend way too much money on it. The Republicans, they don't want to spend money on anything except military and police, seems like. The reason to have a government, I think, is to do things that individuals can't do and corporations can't do. Like a corporation, for example, maybe can build furniture or sporting goods or bring, food to the supermarket, various products, especially processed products. But when you look at healthcare, the government should really be facilitating healthcare, not for-profit companies. And it should really be doing a lot of, there's certain things that the government should do that's where there should be no profit motive involved in to help society function, healthcare being one of the big ones. And that's not what's happening in our country. Our healthcare system has been privatized, even under Obamacare. It's corporate welfare that we're funding private corporations. The government's funding private corporations. So, we need a complete change of our government in this country, and I'm not sure what it's going to take to do that. Honestly, I think it's almost going to have to collapse before it can be saved.
Well, I think we need to have some ideas in place, hopefully before it collapses, because if it collapses without any progressive, better ideas in place, then we're going to be left with whatever the people who are in power decide is going to be what's happening. That's why I think we need our movement to turn on locally to our cities and counties and build our hold everything together that's essential. And we need to maybe even be anticipating a time in the future where the cities would become stressed from some event, as part of the discourse, as part of what but in any case, any final thought? You're done, Mark, and then we'll go to Amanda, and then we can just end our recording, and then we can afterwards.
I think I'm done. I mean, it's been a long discussion. I hope that people can come together, in this country, because I think that right now with Trump in office, the Democrats, of course, they're blaming Trump, but they're not looking at how their own party contributed to this whole mess. And they're sort of thinking, if we can just take back the government from the Republicans, that we can make everything work again. And it's like, well, wait a minute, how did we get here in the first place? And so there needs to be a revolution in thinking in this country. And I'm not, well, your ideas about cities, I think, are absolutely correct. The cities can be a way to get around the federal government, but
Right.
It's getting there is a whole different matter. But I'll leave it at that.
Well, getting there is what a movement would be about. But let's go to Amanda. What are your just concluding, closing thoughts?
Yeah, two things. One is I'll just echo the local, focusing on the local is key, I think, just on a practical level
Yeah.
with the grid stress from AI and the data centers. I think the Department of Energy even put something out about like expecting more blackouts, increasing by 10, 20, 30. I can't remember the factor, but just in a very practical level, grid going out is going to happen more. And then with climate change, but how do you communicate this at the city level without, in a very nonpartisan way, right? Like, hey, don't come at it from the climate change necessarily perspective, but just, hey, this is practical. The grid is old. It's getting stressed from all the data centers for AI. How do we prepare for this as a community, and making it very apolitical, right? Like, this is not for or against Trump. This is just, we need to start thinking locally more going into the future. And it's going to potentially be easier to do in blue states, just because they tend to be a little bit more social leaning.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I definitely, it feels like I'm not the best community organizer, although it took me a long time to come out of the COVID bubble, but that is the thing that the kind of the greatest thinkers that I'm around these days are talking about, is the needing to organize at the community level and be as self-sufficient as possible for, we've needed to do it forever, right? That's like the best advice we hear, act locally, and, community is everything. And so now the stakes are existential. And so, yeah, so I'll just echo that. And then also, I think, just about the whole capitalism and the socialism and private sector versus public sector. This image keeps coming to me about how I feel like, most people are communal, most people are collaborative, and but the people that wind up in power positions are the ones that aren't necessarily collaborative. And they create these systems in their own image. And then we all kind of, fit into it. But so I have a lot of hope. I guess I want to leave on that note, is that I do think that, like, because people will always say, oh, well, people are naturally selfish. You could never have a communist society. Like, people won't really share. And it's like, that's the projection from the capitalists. They don't want to share, right? Yeah, and I think with this changing the narrative and kind of creating our own Overton window, and not having to disagree with everything that's coming up outside of us, but like, no, this is not an argument. We don't have to argue with insanity. And we can create a different word for socialism. Like, this is a co-op. We're talking about co-ops. And, if we tried to sell to people who hate socialism, if we tried to sell the idea, hey, do you want to work at this company and we all get ownership over it? They'd be like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So yeah, just sort of shifting the way we talk about it. And I think, yeah, there is a lot on our side, even though we don't have necessarily the money. I think that, yeah, the majority of people are very, very communal, and that's all. I'll end there.
Well, let's, and we're going to end the recording on that note. The other word that I think has traction, currency, is the egalitarian idea, and which is of a shared and a fair society. And I think we can because the word socialism, communism are freighted, but I don't have no problem talking about socialism or communism. And nor do you, and nor do we in this group. And as you say, we are creating an Overton window, which is that a place of normalizing speaking about issue that expands our consciousness, hopefully. And I guess we're trying to go beyond the Overton window, right? I mean, isn't it?
I should add one thing. That one thing that changed my mind about communism was in Cuba. I didn't realize this. Most Cubans own their own home, and there's actually a rent control. So the government doesn't allow landlords to like soak tenants for a lot of money. I guess the amount you pay in rent has got to be like less than 1/5 of your income in Cuba. But so actually you look at that and you go like, well, that's interesting because we're supposed to be a free society, but yet most people don't qualify to buy a home in the United States. Teachers in Denver, Colorado don't qualify to buy a home to live there.
Yeah, those are where did I hear in Bend, Oregon? We're in Oregon, Mark and I. And where are you, Amanda? What state?
I'm in SoCal.
Okay, so in any case, in a town of Bend, the city basically carved out a number of acres, and they did contract with a builder to build housing that teachers and other public uh, servant can, I guess, have first dibs on at affordable rates because Bend is very popular. A lot of people from Southern California have moved there, driving up prices and so on. So these are basic things that a city can do, and that's so. Let's let's go ahead and say that this has been a Center for Truth Politics, a Green Liberty roundtable event hosted by Emanuel Pastreich. I'm Chuck Fall. I'm the chief proponent for a Green Liberty Caucus. Mark Rolifson, say good night and just give a quick background, and then Amanda, you will say good night and give a quick background, and we'll end our recording.
I'm a member of the Green Party. I'm a member of Green Liberty Caucus as well. You can find me on Substack at Mark's Vigilance Report. And also, if you want to read anything just entertaining, I've got the Mark's Climbing Tales, which is about rock climbing. So anyway,
Thank you, Mark. That's perfect. And Amanda, just a closing remark and a way that people could reach you if you have a Substack or anything.
Yeah, I am on Substack at Amanda Ianthe. And yeah, I'm a writer. Worked in engineering and science for a number of years as an analyst. And I'm also an artist. So kind of jump all over the place. But I would say I think of myself as a systems thinker and a philosopher. If there wasn't such a thing as having to work a day job, I'd be philosophizing and creating art all day. So.
Excellent. Well, and again, hats off to Emanuel Pastreich for pulling this group together. So you have been at a Center for Truth Politics, Green Liberty roundtable event.